The rain fell hard against the streets of Chicago, turning the sidewalks into shining mirrors of light. Ethan Walker pushed open the door of a cafe tucked on the corner, guiding his daughter Sophie inside. His jacket was damp, the flannel shirt underneath marked with years of wear, and the boots on his feet bore the tired scuffs of long shifts spent fixing things that no one else wanted to touch. He shook the water from his shoulders and held the door a moment longer so Sophie, clutching her sketchbook, could step through. She looked up at him with wide eyes, her brown hair sticking slightly from the damp, and he gave her a quiet nod that meant everything was fine now. Inside it was warm, the hum of voices mixed with the soft hiss of the espresso machine, and the world outside felt far away. Sophie pointed toward a small table by the window. Ethan followed her, steady and careful, setting her backpack down with the precision of someone who once checked gear in places where mistakes had consequences. The scar on his hand caught the light for a moment, a silent reminder of who he had been before this life of small paychecks and second-hand furniture. Sophie slid into her chair, her cardigan slipping at the shoulder, already reaching for colored pencils. Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of peace watching her, the way her tiny hands moved with confidence on paper. She carried her mother's gift for art, and he guarded that spark the way he guarded her. The door opened again, and the mood of the cafe shifted. Victoria Hale stepped inside, her presence commanding without effort. She wore a tailored black coat that seemed untouched by the rain, her hair sleek and shining, her heels clicking across the polished floor like punctuation marks in a language of wealth. A driver had likely dropped her off seconds earlier, shielding her from the storm. But even if she had walked through it, no one would have imagined her damp or out of place. People turned to look. They always did. She gave no smile, no greeting, moving with the ease of someone used to control, used to being observed but not approached. Ethan noticed her only when Sophie did, the little girl's eyes following the woman who looked like she belonged on magazine covers rather than in a neighborhood cafe. He studied her for a brief second, recognizing not the designer bag or the expensive watch, but the way her gaze skimmed the room without landing on anyone. It was the look of someone who carried walls inside her, a fortress made of betrayals and loneliness. The contrast was sharp. Ethan, in worn clothes patched by his own hand, lived paycheck to paycheck, finding meaning only in being Sophie's father. Victoria, wrapped in elegance and authority, lived in skyscrapers and boardrooms, surrounded by power but without anyone she trusted enough to sit beside her in quiet. They had walked in from the same storm, but they came from worlds so far apart it seemed impossible their paths would ever cross. Yet in that cafe, as Sophie bent her head to sketch and Ethan reached for the menu with hands roughened by labor, the story that would bind them had already begun to stir beneath the surface. The cafe had settled into a rhythm of low voices, soft music, and the hiss of milk steaming behind the counter. Outside, the storm pressed hard against the glass, but inside was calm, almost safe. Victoria Hale had just received her order. A porcelain cup balanced carefully in her hand as she turned from the counter. She barely had time to take a step before the door banged open. Grant Whitmore strode in, his tie loose, his suit rumpled, the sharp smell of whiskey clinging to him like a second skin. His eyes were glassy, but his stride carried the heavy confidence of a man who believed rules did not apply to him. Without slowing, he shouldered past Victoria, his bulk colliding with her slight frame. The hot coffee spilled down the front of her tailored coat, staining the fine fabric in a dark splash. Her phone nearly slipped from her hand as she caught herself against the counter. The room froze. Grant sneered, his voice loud enough to fill the cafe. "Watch where you're standing. Some of us have real places to be." He towered over her, the smell of alcohol sour in the air, his words dripping with the smug arrogance of money unchallenged. Victoria straightened slowly, her posture regaining the composure of someone used to public humiliation but determined never to bow. She dabbed at her coat with a napkin, her face pale but calm. The whispers started, low at first, then swelling. Phones came up, cameras flashing red dots, people choosing to record rather than intervene. Sophie, from her corner, had stopped shading the sketch she had been working on. Her eyes were wide, but her hand moved again, faster now, sketching the tall man with the angry face, the woman with the ruined coat. She had learned to capture the world when words felt too big. Her gaze flicked to her father. Ethan Walker had already risen. His chair scraped against the floor with a sound that cut through the hush. He moved without hurry, every step measured, his body carrying the weight of old training that never left him. He reached Victoria's side, placing himself between her and Grant. His presence filled the space, tall and solid, but his hands stayed loose at his sides. He didn't puff up or threaten. He simply stood, an immovable line that Grant would have to cross. His voice was quiet, but carried like a blade through the room. Step back. There are children here. The words sank into the silence. The hiss of the espresso machine seemed distant now, every eye fixed on the man in the flannel shirt who spoke with the authority of someone who had once given orders in deserts far away. Grant blinked, thrown off for a moment by the calm certainty. His face twisted, red, from drink and wounded pride. "What are you?" Her bodyguard. He spat the word like an insult. Ethan didn't flinch. His gaze stayed steady, anchored. "I'm someone asking you to walk away." The air seemed to tighten, the room holding its breath. Victoria, for the first time in years, felt the strange comfort of someone standing in front of her without wanting anything in return. She looked at Ethan's broad back, the way he shielded her, as if it were instinct, not obligation. Grant shifted, his bravado flickering under the weight of eyes around the room. Security had been called. The staff whispered into radios. He knew the walls were closing in. He stepped back, but not in surrender. His eyes burned with the promise that this was not over. He turned on his heel and stalked toward the door, muttering curses, his expensive shoes slipping slightly on the coffee pooled on the floor. The door slammed behind him. The cafe exhaled as if waking from a spell. Phones lowered. Conversations rose in nervous bursts. But for Victoria, for Ethan, and for Sophie at her little table with her sketchbook, the night had already changed course. Grant's face tightened as if he could not believe someone had dared to stand against him. He squared his shoulders and tried to loom over Ethan, his voice slurred but sharp with arrogance. "What are you supposed to be? Some kind of fake soldier? A washed-up guard dog?" The words spilled bitterly, meant to provoke. Ethan did not move. His feet were set shoulder-width apart, his weight balanced, his arms loose at his sides. The stance came from years of training. But here it looked like patience rather than threat. His eyes stayed fixed on Grant's, steady and unshaken. There was no heat in them, only the calm focus of a man who had seen worse storms than this. The staff moved quickly now, the manager speaking into a headset while two security guards entered from a side door. They approached Grant, from either side, not touching him yet, but making the message clear. He growled under his breath, muttering that none of this was over. But even in his drunken pride, he knew when the odds had shifted. His shoulders sagged. He allowed himself to be led out, still spitting threats that sounded weaker with each step toward the door. The slam echoed again, then faded, leaving the cafe in a hushed silence. Victoria's pulse was still fast, her coat damp against her skin where the coffee had stained. She looked up at Ethan now, really seeing him for the first time. His shirt was worn, the flannel softened by years of use. The edges of his jeans faded. Yet, His presence filled the room more than Grant's expensive suit ever could. She noticed the scar on his hand, the careful way he had shielded her without aggression, the control that came not from money or power but from discipline and a deeper kind of strength. Her throat tightened with words she did not know how to form. She had been surrounded by men who performed courage for cameras and boardrooms, men who protected her because of contracts and paychecks. This stranger had stepped in for no reason, except that he believed it was necessary. She wanted to say something, but the words stuck. It was Sophie who bridged the silence. The little girl patted across the floor, a crumpled napkin clutched in her hand. She reached up to Victoria with all the solemnity of a child who understood kindness better than most adults. "For your coat," she said softly. "My dad doesn't like bullies." Victoria's lips curved before she realized it. The first smile she had felt all night. It broke through her practiced mask. Small but genuine. She bent slightly to take the napkin, her eyes meeting Sophie's. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words carried more weight than the simple act required. Ethan rested a hand gently on Sophie's shoulder. "Time to finish your drawing, sweetheart." His voice was calm again, quiet and grounding. Sophie nodded, already skipping back to her table. He stayed by Victoria a moment longer, making sure she was steady. Then gave a small nod and returned to his daughter. Victoria stood in the middle of the cafe, the noise of normal life beginning to return around them. For years she had built walls, layer upon layer, until no one could reach her. Tonight, in the space of a few minutes, a stranger and his child had cracked that armor without even trying. The rain had eased by morning, leaving the streets washed clean and glistening under gray clouds. Ethan Walker sat at the kitchen table of his small apartment, a cup of coffee cooling at his elbow while Sophie practiced her letters beside him. She hummed quietly, pencil moving across the page. For a brief moment, the world felt ordinary. Then the knock came. On the counter sat an envelope, cream-colored, the kind of paper that cost more than his grocery budget for a week. The barista at the cafe had handed it to him when he came in earlier, saying someone had left it for him. He had waited until now to open it. Inside was a check that made his breath hitch, $2 million, written in neat, steady script. Beneath it was a card with a single line. "This is not charity. This is gratitude. Signed, Victoria Hale." He stared at the numbers, his thumb running over the ink as if it might smudge. 2 million. Enough to pay off the medical bills that still haunted him after his wife's illness. Enough to move Sophie out of the cramped apartment and into a real home with a yard. Enough to give her every opportunity he had once dreamed for her mother. Yet something inside him resisted. He had not stepped in at that cafe for money. He had done it because his daughter was watching, because he could not let her see the world as a place where cruelty went unanswered. Sophie looked up at him, head tilted. "Daddy, you look worried." He forced a small smile. "Just thinking, sweetheart." She went back to her letters, but he saw the way her brow furrowed, sensing the weight he carried. He turned the check over again, conflicted. Pride warred with practicality. Was it stubbornness to refuse, or weakness to accept? He thought of Sarah, her hand in his as she had whispered near the end that Sophie must always know her father stood for something solid. He had promised. A soft knock pulled him back. He opened the door to find Victoria herself standing there. Not the untouchable woman in a sleek black coat, but in simple jeans and a gray sweater, her hair tied back. She looked younger, almost uncertain. "May I come in?" she asked. They sat at the table, Sophie excusing herself politely with her sketchbook. Victoria placed her hands flat, composed but tense. Grant Whitmore will not let last night go. He is pushing for a hostile takeover. He wants my company, and he will do anything to get it. Ethan studied her. Why tell me? She met his gaze, unflinching. Because you're the only one who stood in front of me without expecting anything back. Everyone else wants a contract, a favor, a payoff. You wanted nothing. He glanced at the envelope. You tried to change that. Her lips tightened. I don't like being in debt. Consider it evening the scale. Ethan leaned back, the chair creaking beneath his weight. I can't take $2 million just for doing the right thing. She opened her mouth, but he raised a hand. Unless half goes into a trust for Sophie's education. The other half funds scholarships for kids whose parents never came home from service. Full transparency. No secrets. Victoria blinked, taken aback. You would give away $1 million. I need my daughter to know her father can't be bought. Something softened in her eyes. For the first time since she arrived, she nodded slowly. Deal. The apartment grew quiet except for Sophie's pencil scratching across the page. In that silence, an uneasy alliance formed, not born of friendship or convenience, but of principle. Two people from opposite worlds, bound now by a promise neither could easily walk away from. The glass tower rose over the city, its steel frame gleaming against the gray sky. Ethan walked beside Victoria as they crossed the marble lobby, their reflections moving across polished stone. He wore his only suit, shoulders straight, every detail of the building's layout already mapped in his mind. Cameras, exits, guards posted at corners. Victoria looked ahead, face calm, but he saw the tension in her jaw. The boardroom on the top floor was built to intimidate. A long table of dark wood stretched the length of the space, leather chairs arranged around it like thrones. The skyline sprawled behind the glass walls. Men and women in tailored suits spoke in hushed tones as Victoria entered and turned, their eyes cutting to Ethan with a mix of curiosity and disdain. At the far end, Grant Whitmore smiled, his expression full of mock sympathy. He wasted no time. He welcomed Victoria with false warmth, then addressed the others. Our CEO is brave for showing up today, considering her latest incident. Word travels fast, does it not? He let the implication hang, suggesting she was fragile, unable to lead. Several members shifted uncomfortably. Ethan remained silent at the wall, but his eyes scanned the room, reading body language the way he once read hostile terrain. Then it happened. The fire alarm blared, shrill and jarring. A guard entered, announcing a possible evacuation. People began to rise. Ethan's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and steady. Sit down. This isn't real. The command froze them. He stepped forward, pulling his phone from his pocket. On the screen was security footage he had accessed moments earlier, showing a man in the stairwell pulling a device from his jacket. The same face Ethan had seen trailing Victoria the day before. Building security rushed out. Minutes later, they returned, dragging in the man with a small disruptor in his hands. Equipment designed to trigger alarms and sow panic. Murmurs filled the room, eyes turning from Victoria to Grant. His confident smile faltered. Ethan spoke again, calm and deliberate. This was meant to move her out of this room, where she would be vulnerable. He let the silence stretch. The weight of his certainty hung heavy. The board members sat straighter, reassessing the woman Grant had tried to discredit, and the man who had just protected her from something far darker than rumor. Grant's fingers tapped against the table, his mask slipping for a fraction of a second. He was rattled, but not beaten. His eyes narrowed at Ethan, a silent promise that he still had cards to play. The weeks after the boardroom battle brought a quiet shift in Ethan Walker's life. Grant Whitmore was stripped of his power, his schemes exposed for all to see, and Victoria Hale emerged from the ordeal stronger than before. Yet for Ethan and Sophie, the victory was not about headlines or corporate triumphs. It was about walking home under a calm sky, hand in hand, knowing they had done the right thing. Ethan returned to his maintenance work, the steady rhythm of fixing what was broken grounding him after the storm. The scholarship fund had been established, half of the money already moving to help children who had lost a parent in service. He kept a small file on his desk, each approved application, a story of hope. A girl accepted into engineering school, a boy with dreams of medicine, 40 families in the first year alone. He told Sophie about each one in simple words she could understand, reminding her that good choices ripple outward. Victoria began to appear in their lives in ways Ethan had not expected. At first, she stopped by with updates about the fund. Then, she lingered. One evening she joined them for pizza, awkward in her designer coat until Sophie handed her a breadstick and declared that no one could eat them with a fork. Laughter followed. Soft at first, then easy. Another afternoon she came to the park, watching Ethan push Sophie on the swings. Her shoes sank slightly in the sand, her hair loose in the breeze, and for once she did not look like a woman carrying the weight of $1 billion company. She looked like someone learning how to breathe. Sophie's drawings began to change too, no longer just pictures of her father fixing things or herself holding a crayon. Now, there were 3 figures: a tall man, a graceful woman, a little girl between them under skies colored bright blue, the sun drawn too big but always shining. Ethan kept one of those drawings tucked inside his work folder, a quiet reminder of what truly mattered. The real test came on a Friday evening when Sophie's school held its fall play. She was cast as a tree, a role she took with great seriousness. Ethan sat in the front row, his heart swelling as she stood on stage in green felt leaves. When the lights dimmed and the children began their lines, he glanced to the side and saw Victoria slip into the seat next to him. She had come, not as a CEO, not as a symbol of power, but simply as someone who cared. Sophie spotted her from the stage, her face lighting up, her small hand waving before she remembered to stand still. Victoria smiled back, eyes shining. Ethan felt something settle in his chest, a warmth that was deeper than gratitude, steadier than admiration. When the play ended, Sophie rushed into their arms. Victoria knelt to hug her, careful not to crush the felt costume, while Ethan stood watching, pride and peace blending in equal measure. That night, walking home with Sophie between them, Ethan realized that wealth was never about numbers on a check. It was about dignity that could not be bought, love that grew quietly, and trust that bridged impossible divides. True wealth was found here, in the laughter of a child, in the steady bond of friendship, in the promise of hope carried forward,